Hey guys, you're watching Let's Talk About Prepping. I'm Tyler, your host, and in this video, we're going to finally end the debate on what gun is the best, for sure. Just a drop in the ocean on that conversation, but we're going to have a crack at it today. So the debate over what gun is the best is indeed never ending. But today we're going to narrow down that conversation quite a bit by looking at it from the perspective of preppers and survivalists. Even now, this still leaves us with a very wide range of considerations to take into account and options, all of which are very valid and cover a lot of different bases, any of which we might need covered in a variety of different emergency situations that we might find ourselves facing. So in this video, I'm going to tell you what I think is the best single firearm that a person can own for most of the prepping or survival situations that we discuss in this community. And also some of the things that you guys have shared with me in past videos on the topic, and just a little bit of a broad coverage of different guns and calibers that I think are very useful and what they're useful for. Now, if you're short on time or for whatever reason don't plan on watching this whole video, then I'll tell you right now, the best single firearm that I think a prepper could own is a 12 gauge shotgun. There. If you guys want to argue with that, you can go ahead into the comments down below. If that's all you wanted to be here to find out, then thanks guys, you can head out now. For the rest of you guys, if you have any more interest in what the rest of everybody had to talk about, I'll put a timestamp here to tell you where to go in the video to find out the list of weapons that other people suggested, and just my breakdown of a bunch of different weapons and their power levels compared to each other. I'll explain that later on. Anyways, for the rest of you guys, if you want to watch the whole video, first, I'm going to share with you a little bit of context on where I'm coming at from this list and my experience with firearms. Because while that's not really important in the context of this video, some of you probably will care about it, and it might help give you a little bit of context on where I'm coming from, my experience with firearms, and the kinds of things that I've done with them and think that I might need to do with them, because that's very important. Somebody who lives in the woods and plans on having the SHTF in the woods and who has to deal with bear and elk and humans has a lot of different considerations than somebody who lives deep in New York or LA or various other metropolitan areas. And that's important to consider whenever you take into consideration what they suggest a person keep for a firearm. So, a little bit of context on my background concerning weapons and firearms. I've been exposed to them throughout my life. My father was a Boy Scout leader as I was growing up, and aside from that, he lived in an area growing up, a very rural area where everybody had firearms. So he was very comfortable with them throughout his life, and often took Boy Scouts to the gun range to shoot the little 22 LR rifles that they often train with. And so this is something that I was often exposed to and something that I've always been comfortable with. And it's been a family tradition in the paternal side of my family for quite a while to give a young son a firearm. And so at the age of 12, I was given my own personal firearm, which my parents kept locked in a safe for me, which was a Ruger 2245 22LR pistol. They chose this one for me because it was something that I could comfortably shoot at that age and which would suit both a young person and an older person as a target pistol. And it's something that I've enjoyed having throughout my life. Now, aside from my younger experience with just basic target shooting and training, as I grew up, I maintained an interest in firearms, and many of the people who I have been friends with also enjoyed firearms, and we have spent a lot of time shooting together. Now, when I reached adulthood, and moved to the rural area near where I live now, I was lucky enough to obtain a job, mostly through chance, manufacturing firearms. I worked in a rather small firearms manufacturer where we largely made AR-15s and 1022s and parts for those and various other weapons, including machine gun parts for the M16, including a very interesting 22 LR open bolt machine gun upper system for the AR or for the M16, which allows it to shoot over 310 rounds a minute. Anyways, during this time, I gained a lot of experience not only doing the CNC machining and a lot of the small back of the house work that needs to occur when it comes to manufacturing firearms and firearms parts. I learned a whole lot when it comes to ballistics, reloading, and different weapons and what they're good for. During this time, I was subscribed to a lot of podcasts and magazines that covered ballistics and firearms usage and just a lot of other different things. And in fact, that's something that I have had through a lot of my life. Even during adolescence, I've always had uncles and people in my life who gave me boxes full of their subscriptions to gun magazines. Anyways, during my time at the gun shop, I really learned a whole lot about a lot of different guns and gained valuable experience. During that time, I shot tens of thousands of rounds through various weapons, although largely through the AR-15 platform and through the 12 gauge and 1022 platforms. Although I gained a lot of experience on a wide variety of weapons because during this time I had a lot of personal and work friends who really enjoyed purchasing and trying out and swapping different weapons. And so I really got a good crash course on a lot of different weapons types and their use, both on the range and out on the field on the large properties of people that live in that area. So I have quite a good bit of experience on putting a whole lot of rounds, thousands of rounds, through a variety of different weapons, both on the range and out carrying them through the woods. Now, I also gained a bit of experience on machine guns of a variety of types during this period of time. Aside from my work experience with firearms, I have always been shooting them in my personal time and also engaging in conversation and research regarding their applications in the field of survivalism and prepping. So, in that context, I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts when it comes to weapons, what their uses are good for in different prepping and survivalism situations, and what I think the best ones are for a prepper to keep around for a variety of these situations. Now, please keep in mind that I don't think I have a superior authority on this. I'm just sharing you my compilation of thoughts and what I think is really just a good all around weapon for a prepper to keep. I'd love to engage in conversation and hear what your thoughts are, because I'll be honest, one of my proudest parts of this channel has nothing to do with myself, except in so much as I have attracted a lot of very intelligent and wise preppers to myself. The suggestions that I got from you guys were not disappointing in the least. All of you had very good and well assessed choices that you wanted to share. And I was pretty surprised with this because my understanding from a lot of other channels is that they are often inundated with suggestions that just make them shake their heads at their followers. And I don't know if I've just been lucky or somehow just repelled trolls, but you guys just always have really good advice that I always nod my head at and have to agree with, even if it argues with my own, because everybody does have their own situation and their own handle on their situation, and you guys all tend to have a really good handle on your situation. At least all of the ones that I can remember commenting frequently, and especially on this video. So let's get into it. I'm going to leave my suggestion until it comes up in this list. And this list will contain both the things that you guys suggested and a few things that I've added in, both just because of how common they are in the gun community and also because of their usefulness in a few different situations. Now, I've built this list in order of the muzzle energy of the weapon involved. And at this point, it would be a good idea to talk about the different applications that weapons might be put to. In different situations, you will be using different weapons for different things. And it's important to choose the weapon that will both best cover the applications that you expect to use the weapon in, and also which will cover a variety of applications that you might need to use the weapon in. It's important to spend a lot of time ruminating on what you think you might need a weapon for. There are a lot of people who think that they need an AR-15 because they expect to be in combat. And it's important to ask yourself if you are prepared to be in combat in other aspects beside the ability to move a lot of lead quickly. And also if that's something that you really want to plan on doing. I know that you never plan on using a firearm, but in this case, it is important to consider, considering the investment involved, if that ability is something that you need to strive towards before others. Now, I know that that makes it sound like I am questioning the AR-15, but I'm simply questioning the wisdom in purchasing it simply on the consideration that you think you might need to use it in combat. So beyond that, it's important to actually consider what you think you might need a weapon for. If you're purchasing something because you want to defend yourself on a daily basis and you do plan on actually carrying it, then obviously something readily concealable like a handgun, a rather compact handgun, will be one of your best choices. But for somebody who is retired and lives at their home deep in the woods, miles from another house, a handgun may seem somewhat silly, especially if they rarely leave the vicinity of their immediate house. And so something like a long gun might be a lot more feasible for someone like that, who usually thinks of a firearm in terms of hunting large game or defending themselves from a human or a large animal. In the case of a human, at distance, and in the case of a large animal, rather up close. Other people don't necessarily think that they'll need a firearm except in extreme cases of self-defense, like if a group of men who have bad motives come down their driveway during an SHTF situation, in which case a battle rifle like an AR-15 or a 7.62 by 39 rifle would be one of your best options. So it's important to consider what you plan to need your weapon for, whether that's simply for food gathering or self-defense. So with that in mind, let's look at some of the options that you guys have shared and talk about what that weapon is good for and its muzzle energy as we go along. So at the bottom of the list, we have the slingshot. Now, a slingshot does give you the ability to make a projectile, something that is flying through the air that could hurt someone else. And you can kill people with a slingshot if you're good at it and if they're within the proper range. So it's not necessarily something that should be discounted. And in fact, I think it's something that every prepper should practice with. And I'll admit it's something that I haven't practiced with in forever, despite the fact that it has been a lifelong dream of mine to be adept with a slingshot and be able to simply point and click and basically kill small game at a whim while walking around through the woods. So that's something that I really want to practice at, and I would love to see a lot of people practicing at, because it's such a simple tool, it's cheap, it's pretty much ubiquitous, and it's something that you should be able to practice all the time if you're physically capable and just gain a free ability that's really cool and impressive to other people and really handy to have in a lot of situations. Now, after the slingshot, we move up to the pellet rifle. And this is something that I do actually think is underappreciated, despite the fact that it does get mentioned a decent amount in some circles. But I really don't see a lot of people appreciating the air pellet rifle for all that it's worth. You can purchase a pellet rifle for $100, and I'm sure you can get a decent used one for less if someone's trying to get rid of it. A pellet rifle usually works either by pumping a slide action on them, or in some cases by breaking the barrel on a spring and a hinge and pumping a piston to compress air to fire a single pellet at about 1200 feet per second, which is strong enough to kill coyotes, small deer, and probably humans if the projectile is placed properly. Now, these only have a foot-pounds muzzle energy of about 12 to 20 foot-pounds of force, but that is still plenty to score a kill on plenty of medium to large-sized mammals. So a pellet rifle is a really good choice because to reload the bullets, for one thing, is extremely cheap. The projectiles are extremely small and they don't require any casing or powder. And so you can either cast them or swage them using a bullet press, using only just raw lead, which you can collect from car tires and various other sources, making these extremely easy to reload compared to most other projectile types. They're also extremely quiet guns. You can fire a pellet rifle, and most people will not recognize what the sound is unless they see the effects of the projectile, which are usually not very spectacular. So it would be possible to hunt small game very near to other people without them realizing that a firearm type weapon has been discharged. It's even the kind of thing that you could probably practice with just outside of town. Not necessarily so far out that you wouldn't get the cops called on you if you were shooting a lot of bullets, but most people will not recognize the occasional crack of a pellet rifle. So it's something that is a lot easier to practice with, and it's a lot cheaper and more readily available in a lot of gun controlled areas. So a lot of people can get their hands on a pellet rifle and practice with it much more easily than they can with other weapon types. So for that reason, I think that it's a great first weapon for anybody. And in regards to the actual first weapon that a person purchases and practices with, I really do think that the pellet rifle or the 22, even a single action like somebody suggested, is a really good option. You really want to start out with something that you're comfortable with and which you can practice with very easily. And the cheapness of both the pellet rifle and the 22 LR ammunition are a really good option for that. So moving up from the pellet rifle, we do have the 22 revolver and the 22 single shot, both of which were suggested for first weapons for a person in general, but also as pretty decent weapons for a prepper. Now, the 22 revolver is pretty decent. You can get, I think, up to 8 shots in some of those. I wouldn't be surprised if some even have 10 shots. And it makes a pretty decent option because the 22 is indeed one of the cheapest rounds that there is, and you can get a whole bunch of them in a carry bag for the same weight of something like a 12 gauge. So anything with a 22 is just a really good option, and a 22 revolver really isn't a bad choice. Now, moving up from there, you have your other revolvers, things like 357s and upward from there, like 45s. Now, a lot of you will know that a 357 revolver is what I carry, and I really think that it is a good option. Now, I forgot to tell you what the 22 LR's muzzle energy is. And a lot of the charts that I had it at 170 to 200 foot-pounds of force. So that's quite a bit, but it's not nearly as much as a lot of the things that we have later on. It's important to remember, though, that a hole is a hole, and that nobody wants to get shot with a 22. So some common revolver calibers, well, let's just look at the 357. It has a muzzle energy of 583 to probably somewhere around 700 if you have some really hot lows and a longer barrel. And I'm willing to bet that if you have it in a carbine, like a lever action, you're going to be able to push that to quite a bit more. So next on the list after the revolvers was one of the more popular categories with you guys, which is the high capacity pistols, things like 1911s and Glocks, predominantly 9 millimeters, although we had a 40 and obviously some 45s with the 1911s. The Glock is a really good option. The 9 is a very ubiquitous round, and having a pistol on you, like a lot of you said, is just going to be a really good option because the gun that you have with you is the one that you're going to use, and a pistol will get you to the long gun or whatever else you need in a serious situation. So I really think that a pistol is a really good option for someone as just a single gun because a lot of people just want one gun that they can carry with them day in and day out. And if you're going to carry it and keep it with you all the time, I think that that is a really good option. Now, the problem is that a lot of people are not going to carry a gun or necessarily even keep it in their car. And if you're not, then there are some other better options for you if it's something that's just going to sit in your closet anyways. But I am a strong advocate of everybody carrying a pistol if you're able to legally do so. And so, with that in mind, if you are going to carry it, I might agree that making a pistol your one and only might be a decent choice. But we'll get back to that later whenever we get to my one and only. So high capacity pistols are very good. To share the muzzle energy of just a few of these, we have the 9mm at 364 foot-pounds of force, the 40mm at 490 foot-pounds of force, and the 45 at anywhere between 412 foot-pounds of force and 587. And again, I'm sure that that is getting pushed more with a carbine like a Tommy gun or various other things with a longer barrel. Alright, so moving on from the high capacity pistols, we have the other category that tied with them for second place with 6 votes, and that is the 1022, especially with takedown or silencer accessories. And this is a really good option. I really can't argue with it, especially when you consider all of the benefits of the 1022 and the fact that not everybody can go with my choice, which is the 12 gauge, for a variety of reasons. But the 1022 just really gives you a lot of options for hunting and self-defense, although it will leave you wanting in a few different categories. But if you know what you're talking about and you know what you're going to use it for and what you think you'll need and your capabilities with it, then the 1022 is really an option that I can't tell you not to go with. So I don't think it's wrong that a lot of you chose it. And if it's what you think you want to go for, then with all things considered, not a bad choice. Now the 1022 may be able to push a little bit more muzzle energy out of that 22LR than the 200 foot-pounds of force that I cited earlier, but that's asking quite a bit. But it is plenty to put holes in things. So moving on from the 1022, we have the 410 and 20 gauge shotguns. And these are really good options because if you can't handle a 12 gauge, like if you have back or shoulder injuries, or you just have a smaller frame, these give you a lot of the benefits of a 12 gauge shotgun in a smaller package, including the ability to use shot to hunt for birds and small game, and also slugs for larger game. So the 410 comes in a muzzle energy of 786 foot-pounds of force, and the 20 gauge in 1575. That's sitting on both sides of the AR-15, which is our next choice. Now the AR-15 came in with 3 votes, and I'm pretty impressed with you guys because I expected a lot of AR-15s. I don't think it's a bad option, but I really just expected more because of the prevalence of it in the community. But it is a really good option, and if it's what you're comfortable and you know you're good with, then it is a good choice. So the 5.56 223 is a really good cartridge for just a lot of jobs, although some of our guys overseas have said that it doesn't have the characteristics to be lethal after going through some wall materials or car doors or things like that. And they often like to have an AK-47 or a 308 around for things like that. So that's definitely something to consider. But all in all, the AR-15 and M16 M4 platforms are really, really good. Now I will say that I always prefer the single shot over the machine gun for most situations. having fired machine guns enough to get my grasp on them, I always prefer the shot placement over the quantity of shots strategy. So the AR-15 has a common muzzle energy of about 1371 foot-pounds of force, and this is quite a bit of energy, especially considering how fast it's going. But the bullet is rather small and easily compromised, so definitely something to consider. Moving on from the AR-15, we have actually an AR-15 caliber load, which brings us to another thing that the AR-15 is great for. The lower receiver and upper receiver can be detached, allowing you to attach a differently calibered upper receiver, giving you a wide variety of caliber options for the same platform. So the AR-15 can basically shoot anything that can fit up through the magwell and out through the barrel. So you can chamber a rifle in a variety of different rounds and carry the same buttstock and lower receiver with a variety of uppers, and often fit the bullets in the magazines without modification. So there are a variety of different calibers, and I'll mention a couple of them that can be modified onto the AR-15 platform. The one that I'm mentioning right now is the 300 Blackout, which is a pretty popular 30 caliber round that is often put into the AR-15 platform. And I imagine that it can fit between 20, probably 20, and maybe up to 25 rounds in your standard AR-15 magazine if it's anything like the Whisper, which I do have a little bit of experience with. So this is a pretty decent option, and it allows you to use your AR-15 platform to push a slightly larger projectile, which may have slightly better characteristics in certain situations than the 5.56. The 300 Blackout is sitting right about the same as the 5.56 at 1377 compared to the 1371 foot-pounds of force. So moving on from the AR-15 and the 300 Blackout, we have the 7.62x39. So that's going to be your AK-47s, your SKSs, and various similar things. Now, this is a really good round, and it is one of the most popular platforms in all of history for a very good reason. The AK-47 and SKS platforms are extremely reliable in a variety of adverse conditions, and the bullet itself is extremely good both at range and in urban settings, and has decent post-penetration characteristics, meaning it will go through something and still kill you. So the AK-47 is just hard to argue with as an extremely reliable platform, because it's just well known that it can go into sand, mud, water, a lot of different conditions, and just keep on going and do a lot of things that the AR-15 just gets bogged down with. Now, I know that you've seen videos of the AR-15 getting thrown in mud and still shooting, but any advancements applied to it are going to be applied to the AK-47 platform and help it out. And that bullet just has a little bit more oomph and slightly better characteristics in a few different situations. And so while I love the AR-15 platform, I do tend to lean towards the AK-47 platform in a lot of different situations for a few different reasons, but not in all situations. I really do love the AR-15 and the 5.56. But with a 7.62x39 bullet coming out of your average barrel, you're looking at about 1607 foot-pounds of force, which is just over 200 more than the AR-15 caliber. So the 7.62 actually got an equal number of votes as the AR-15, showing that there's a pretty even cant to both of the main battle rifle popular calibers. So moving on from the 7.62x39, we're going to give an honorable mention to the 454 Cazul, because one of you is carrying one of those beast Raging Judge revolvers out there. Now, the 454 Cazul is pushing a hot 1800 out of, what is that, a 6 or 7 inch barrel? So that thing is going to provide some real kick. To give reference, our 357 is cooking at up to 700. So you're looking at 1100 foot-pounds of force more than a 357. And just about 400 or 420 pounds of force more foot-pounds of force more than the AR-15 coming out of a hand cannon, folks. Moving on from the 454, we have the 30-06, which none of you mentioned, but I'm going to throw in here just for reference. That's coming at 2250 foot-pounds of force. That is a good hunting round. Going on from there, we have the 458 SOCOM, which is probably one of the largest rounds that you can push out of an AR-15, aside from the 50 Beowulf, I think it is. Maybe I'm wrong there. But the 458 SOCOM is pushing a 45 caliber projectile at 2565 foot-pounds of force, which is a whole lot of energy for 10 rounds coming out of an unmodified AR-15 magazine in an AR-15 at semi-auto. Now I've shot one of these, and here's the interesting thing. You have to use a very fast burning powder, and because the cartridge can only be so large given the magazine well of the AR-15, the powder pretty much has to be pistol powder, and you can only fit so much that it burns out within the length of a 10-inch barrel, making this have to be a pistol AR-15. So you're carrying a shoulder cannon in pistol form out to the range and shooting it. And the guy who made it, who was the programmer for the CNC machines at the gun shop that I worked at, said that it actually started to warp and stress the lower receivers because of the force that it applied to it. And I believe it because I can tell you that thing sat you back on your heels when you shot it. So the 458 SOCOM is not a bad caliber to have an option for with your AR-15 or receiver. And for those of you who are calibering out their AR-15s, I do suggest it. It's pretty fun, and I could see it being pretty valuable, especially if you had some steel cores in your homemade 458 SOCOM ammunition, which, by the way, is the only way you're getting that stuff, by my understanding. So moving on from the 458 SOCOM, we have the reliable 308. That's AR-10s and various bolt-action rifles and various other semi-automatic rifles. 308's coming in at 2648 foot-pounds of force, and this is just a really killer round, especially coming out of something like an AR-10 or FAL or various other semi-automatic 308 weapons. This thing is going to punch through a lot of armor, a lot of walls and cars, and still have lethal force. So if you have a battle rifle in 308 or even just a bolt action that you're good with, you really can't argue with this as a good go-to weapon for a prepper. Moving on from the 308, we have the 7.62x54. This is Mosin Nagant, the Dragunov, and various other rifles usually that communists like. Now, this is a killer round. I've had the Mosin Nagant and I've shot it quite a bit. At 2787 foot-pounds of force, this is a really killer round, and it has a lot of kick and a lot of penetrating and just energy transferring power to it. There's a good reason that this is used over long distances to kill both people and large game. Now, I wouldn't necessarily suggest making a Mosin Nagant or Dragunov your first choice as your one and only, but it is really cheap, and a lot of people do have that, and it's the only one they got. So if it is, don't kick yourself too hard because it is a decent round if you know what you're doing with it. But there are other things that you could go with. Moving on from the 7.62x54, we have the 7.92x57, which is commonly referred to as the 8mm Mauser. This is another of your bolt action World War I, World War II weapons, the Kar-98. The 8mm Mauser is a great round. I've also owned one of these. In fact, I owned an authentic Nazi rifle with all this symbols stamped into it, but I had to let that go at one point or another. But the 8mm is a killer round, and it has a lot of power. It's one of those point and destroy rounds. It's really good for hunting, and as time has shown, it's really good for human-to-human violence. So if it's something that you find your hands on, don't weep too much because you do have your hands on something that will get a lot of hunting and a lot of self-defense done in a lot of situations. Now, it's important to remember at this point, guys, that a lot of people just don't have the money or ability to get more than just what they're able to get their hands on. So in this breakdown, we're sort of trying to cover a lot of the different options that people might have available to them and what they can do with them. So the 8mm Mauser is a decent option for a bolt-action rifle, especially because it's not exactly rare. Now, moving on from there, because the 8mm Mauser is getting up there at 3021 foot-pounds of force, we have what is mine and a lot of your guys' favorite choice for your one and only firearm for a prepper or survivalist, and that is the 12 gauge shotgun with 13 votes, more than doubling the two that tied for runner up. So the 12 gauge shotgun is perhaps hands down the most quintessential firearm that a person can own. It is arguably America's symbolic firearm, historically speaking, and just one of those things that everybody recognizes the sound of and pretty much can use. A shotgun is very basic, very reliable, and very powerful. At an average of 3,100 foot-pounds of force for a slug, and I know that that goes up quite a bit with your 3.5-inch Magnum 1.5-ounce slugs, you're looking at a lot of power. And whenever you're looking at buckshot or 8-shot or 4-shot, you have a wide range of ability to hunt anything from pigeons in the air, turkeys on the ground, up to humans and bear and various things. I have myself stood off against a bull using a shotgun, and between firing rounds off into the ground and being ready to put slugs into its shoulders if it charged at me, and being able to retreat into a very sturdy and safe spot, I was pretty confident using my 12 gauge protecting animals and people from a raging bull that had gotten loose. And I know that in the case of bears or various other large animals, the kinetic energy of a shotgun slug and its destructive capability is one of the best things that you can arm yourself with, including against vehicles and armored opponents. And this is where the foot-pounds of force muzzle energy of a weapon really comes into play, because while many bullets can penetrate or cause damage, even when a bullet is stopped by body armor, the amount of energy that it conveys is still destructive to the target. And for that reason, the shotgun slug is one of the most devastating things that your average person can get their hands on to defend themselves with. A shotgun slug can go through car doors and multiple walls or other layers of barrier to get at the target that is harassing you. And for that reason, a shotgun is a really good thing to have in your hands. Aside from that, you can easily get one for under $200 and perhaps for as low as $100. I got this shotgun for $150 at a pawn shop. Now, this is one of the most common shotguns that, and widely accepted as one of the more reliable and go-to brands of shotgun that there is. This is a Mossberg 500, and though historically I have loved the Remington 870 more, I'm more than happy to have my hands on this because the models are quite similar. And aside from a few mechanism differences, if you know one, you know the other. And both of these are just extremely reliable and user-friendly weapons that give you a lot of power and versatility in a package that most people are quite familiar with. The shotgun, just for a lot of different reasons, is a superior platform. It's the kind of thing that most anybody can quickly get a handle on how to disassemble and reassemble and clean and be able to carry and use in the field with a minimum of problems. Now, I do actually plan on talking about this quite a bit more in separate videos because this one's already going to be quite long, and I do want to get to a couple more options. But for a lot of different reasons that are expounded on both by myself and other preppers, the 12 gauge shotgun covers more bases than anything else and is perhaps one of the best options that any prepper can have in their arsenal. So moving on from the 12 gauge, there really are only a couple of other options that I want to get to. And that would be the 4570, which is a pretty common large game rifle. Although when I say pretty common, I mean among large game rifles. And that's coming in at 3,449 foot-pounds of force, which is on the higher end of what you might expect for most common civilian rifles to have, at 350 foot-pounds of force, more than your 12-gauge shotgun slug. So the 4570 is going to be one of the heftier things that a person might expect a civilian to have around to take down large game like bear or elk or moose, or something like a large military truck engine. So, aside from that, we do have Uncle Al's suggestion of a hatchet, and that goes along with his suggestion of some 30 caliber main battle rifle being the main thing that someone should have. So something like an SKS or an AK-47, or perhaps even up to a AR-10, silenced with a side-folding, a skeletonized stock with an optic, a laser, and with a hatchet for backup. So I hope that that's been a decent enough coverage of some of the different things that preppers might want to consider when it comes to firearms. I'm pretty sure that I'm missing some of the things that I wanted to share, even just on some of the categories that I mentioned. So just a final quick run through here, guys, for those of you who are joining in for our time-stamped recap. We have the pellet rifle with 1 mention, the 22 revolver with 1 mention, 22 single shot with 1 mention, the revolver, or I'm sorry, the high capacity magazine and the revolvers, so those being the 9, the 40, the 45, and the 357. We have the 1022 with 6 mentions, the high capacity having 6 mentions, and the revolver having 3 mentions. The 410 and 20 gauge shotguns having 1 mention, the AR-15 and M16 having tied with the 7.62x39 with 3 mentions each. The 454 Casull revolver with 1 mention. And getting into some that I added myself, we have the 30-06, the 458 SOCOM, the 308, the 7.62x54, the 7.92x57, and getting back into the most popular firearm for preppers among those who responded to my recent video on the subject, 13 mentions with a 12-gauge shotgun. Then we also have the 4570 and the hatchet and slingshot. If you want the muzzle energies of those weapons, I will write it down in the description down below. I hope that this was interesting for some of you guys, and if you have any contention with any of it, I would love to hear it from you in the comments down below. I hope that this was interesting, and I hope that you're all doing well out there. Everybody, stay safe.